Hi everybody, within this session we're going to do a deep dive into Introduction to Business Analysis. This will help you explore what it is, what it entails and why you should do it on a project. So let's get started. So first let's dig down into the different areas of business analysis. What are the different parts? So the first element of it is about understanding the business priorities. It's about creating the business case about why you should invest in this piece of technology and move forward with the changes required. There has to be good, there has to be a valid and good return on investment. So the first element is business priorities. The second is about understanding the business processes. This is where you're going to elicit and document the as is and will be processes to undertake that technical audit of how people use technology now in their day-to-day jobs. As part of this, you're going to be gathering then requirements, and this is going to include high level to low level, functional and non-functional requirements. And then finally, you're going to be at the stage where you can propose technology solutions to your client or your team, which will give them the return investment that they are really looking for. So they're the 4 stages that we're going to look more in detail at. Now, business analysis and understanding how to do this professionally is really important, and making sure that you've got these key principles in place as best practice is really important on any project to make sure it's a success. Problems will arise if you don't do business analysis properly. Requirements will not be gathered properly, they won't be prioritized, and they won't be delivered to align to the business goals. And also, there can be no consistent, clear documentation generated. And that's a huge problem because then there isn't an audit trail about why or what things were needed to get the sign-off that's required from the client. If these things aren't done properly, then the outcome quite often means that a technology does not align to their business need. There can be quite often an overspend on budget, and user adoption can be nil or low. And this is where reputational projects happen and why you might get the exclamation of, well, Salesforce is rubbish, it doesn't work for us. But actually, the only reason it doesn't work is because business analysis hasn't been done properly and the technology hasn't been designed and built with the business reasons in mind. If you do business analysis properly, then you're going to get the best outcome that you're going to need. And those 2 things have to go in hand. Now, there is lots of research out there that demonstrates why business analysis is really important and why it should be done properly. Again, it's about having a professional approach to it and understand all the nuts and bolts. When I trained in business analysis, it was a 4-week course. It's not a light touch approach. It is really about understanding all the little nitty-gritty parts and how to do it. So it's something you want to invest your time and energy in learning more about if this is something that you want to do. Now, as you can see from some of the statistics in this slide, on average, performance virtually doubled as organisations progressed from using an ad hoc approach for requirements, definition and management to having institutionalised and consistent competency in all capability areas. Average on-time performance of technology projects increased by 161%. Time overruns on projects reduced by 87%. Average on-budget performance for technology projects improved by just over 95%. Budget overruns reduced by just under 75%. Percentage of projects that deliver the functionality needed by the business rose by just over 75%. Average functionality miss dropped by approximately 78%. So if this doesn't give you the reason, I'm not sure what would. What you want to do is be the best you can be. As I say, I always talk about being a super Salesforce consultant. So it's about, putting in place really good approaches to these topics. So I'm going to give an overview of what some of these areas would be and things that you would need to think about and learn more about what to do. So there's 4 pillars that we're going to look through. The first is about why. Why should we be doing this project? That's what the first pillar is in business analysis. It looks at the strategy and it looks at the business case. The second is, okay, we've got the reason about why. If we're going to go ahead, how do we do it? How do we elicit the information from the different stakeholders? Then we're going to look at what. How do we document everything that we found out? I'm going to talk through the different types of documentation you might produce. And then when. When are we going to do all this and how is it going to roll out? And this is looking at project management principles. And we are going to do a deep dive into agile project management in more detail. Let's get started with the first pillar about why. This is looking at, why should we be doing this? Is there a business case? And this is really required to get any investment in time and energy from senior management to actually proceed with the project. So with this, you're going to be looking firstly at the business strategy of the organisation. Where is the business wanting to go in the next 3 years? What are its current pain points? What are its challenges? What are its business needs? And can technology actually solve those problems and help improve them? So that's what we need to align to. And as part of that discussion, we need to make sure that there's clear key performance indicators that will demonstrate the value that this project is going to make for that organisation. Now, I quite often will go into an organisation with 15 different indicators to put on the table for open discussion. That helps people understand what is possible and starts the conversation, but quite often they will add to those as well. It's really recommended that you go in with a suite of KPIs to really talk through what is absolutely possible, because not everybody realizes the value that technology can bring to them. And part of our role is to educate them on that. So do equip yourself with KPIs that you can put on the table, have an open discussion, expand on them, and help come up with that business case. And you'll be working closely hand in hand with the executive sponsor. Now, the executive sponsor needs to be the champion for this project. They need to be brought in. They need to have a valid business case. They need to be the ones bringing the rest of the management team on board with them and being, as I say, the champion for the whole organisation. They will be the ones that will be investing the budget, but equally they're the ones who will be monitoring and expecting to see that return on investment. So it has to be tangible, smart, realistic for everybody involved. Now, around the executive sponsor, you'll have a centre of excellence. And the centre of excellence is made up of these senior management professionals who will all be on board with it alongside the technical team. And together they will continue to shape and evolve the business strategy, the CRM strategy as you move forward. And they will be constantly reviewing it in an iterative way using agile project management, which we'll come on to see. Now, collectively, they all need to be on board with the business case. As I say, the business case needs to make sense. It needs to stack up. It needs to have clear, measurable outcomes for everybody. The budget that you're investing, there needs to be a financial return from that in some way or another. Some of the key outcomes might be financial returns. It might be about compliance requirements. It might be about customer service, reputational risk. There are various reasons why there's a clear business case for this going forward. But that whole management team, including the exec sponsor, all need to feel solid about what it's going to do for them. And then the stakeholders will also be involved in this business strategy, making sure that you understand who they all are, what their roles are, who needs to be involved in this conversation, who needs to be brought into it. There's a whole stakeholder audit that needs to be done. And we'll move on to the elicitation strategy next, because the next step is to actually engage with these people. So with pillar 2, we're looking at the elicitation strategy. How are we going to collect the requirements from people? Now, I talked about functional requirements, non-functional requirements earlier. We need to do a whole range of elicitation to gather all of that information through doing process mapping, through the documentation, etc. Now, with elicitation, the approach you take might depend on the culture of the organisation, and we'll come on to that when we look at change management. And so you might not choose all of these different approaches depending on the size of the organisation, the culture of the organisation, the way that you're working with that organisation. But some of your options are to do interviews, to do shadowing, to do a workshop, to do some questionnaires, to do meetings with people, to do a focus group, and to also do a document analysis. They're all the different ways that you can sit and gather information about how they currently work now, how they need to work in the future, and what they need going forward. So you can really help to start shaping the functional and non-functional technical requirements that are coming through. Jump through a slide. Now, once you've gathered all of this information, or while you're gathering it, you're going to have to document it. Now, when we say documentation, it doesn't necessarily mean in a Word document or Excel, could be, but it could also be using various systems and tools to document requirements. So the types of documentation that you will produce during a project should include a business canvas, which will look at the business strategy. It might include it will include, the business case that we've talked about. It will include the CRM strategy. It will include process maps, which will map out potentially the as is and will be processes. It will include a technical audit, which will do an appraisal of all the technology that's being used in that organization. And that will also highlight what might be replaced, what might be integrated, and what might be kept. So you've got that overview of all the technology and how it all interacts with each other. You'll have a stakeholder context diagram, which will show the different stakeholders, who they are, what their roles are, what their level of influence is, how they need to be on board, and also their emotional attachment to this project. How bought in are they, or are they anti it? Stakeholder mapping is really, really important. Requirements log will document all the requirements that you've identified from functional, non-functional requirements. You'll also produce a technical workbook, which will document all of the fields, email templates, processes, flows, etc., that you need to build in that system. So that's your library of all the work to do. Once you've done that, it's then much more easier to budget how long things will take, because you've got everything documented out. And what I would often do is have a budget calculator that went hand in hand with that, which would allow me to plug in all the build work and allow me to calculate and then estimate and give that back to the client. So you might have a budget calculator there. And then typically you'd have an object entity diagram as well. So they're the range of things that you'll be producing on a project that you'll share with the client, that hopefully they'll then take ownership of and own, and this will also act as your sign-off documentation, because it will be, this is what we agreed, this is what we've produced, are you happy with the work undertaken? It's really a way of sharing and agreeing the milestones of the project and what is being produced for the money being invested. So important to have this documentation and to know how to produce it properly. We've then got the fourth pillar, which is around project management. Now, with project management, it is about managing the functional requirements and the non-functional requirements that need to be built throughout this project and making sure that they are prioritized. Most importantly, because quite often the wish list is much longer than the budget normally allows. So it's about understanding everything that's in that wish list, having a prioritization process, which I will teach you in the introduction to Agile project management. It's about knowing what is possible within the time frame. So going back to that point about the budget calculator, you want to understand how long things are going to take, so you can have that type of conversation with the client, because you want to keep things in scope. Quite often the term scope creep is used. Project management is the way to keep things in scope. It's about having a good agreement with the client about what is in and out of scope, what prioritization means and how to do it collectively as a team, and to be able to then allocate budget and resource appropriately to get all of these things done. But equally, the final point on here is dependencies. It's about understanding what's dependent on each other, because actually the flow of a project and how things can be timed and delivered will largely depend on one thing being done before the other. So you want to make sure there's a natural flow, and that actually you're aware of those dependencies, because again, that can make a project go beyond the expected time frame. So best practice for project management is to deliver things within time and budget, and delivering those things that have been agreed with the client that would be delivered within that scope. That's where you want to get to as a professional consultant, is to feel confident to hold that conversation and to be able to confidently say to a client, we're not going to get everything into this budget, but using Agile project management methodologies, which we'll go into, you'll be able to hold that conversation in a structured way that feels comfortable for both of you. So what you want to have in your toolbox, and this is your sense check really, is you want to have a series of templates to document things. So when you're going in to do a business analysis workshop, do you have presentation templates that facilitate business workshops and you can document the business case and the functional requirements and everything else? So you want a series of templates that you can use time and time again that answer and ask all the key questions. We cover this more in the training around business analysis. In terms of business analysis scripts, do you have a ready-made set of questions per project and type of solution? So, for example, if you were going into a Sales Cloud implementation, do you have a series and set of questions that would be applicable to doing a Sales Cloud implementation, i.e. questions you would ask of the client or team that you're working with? This is where you want to get to. You want to have a suite of questions that you would ask on Sales Cloud or Service Cloud or Nonprofit Cloud, whichever cloud you're working with, that you could give to the client in advance and talk through. Prepare them for the business analysis workshop. Say, this is what I'm coming in to ask you. This is what I'd like you to prepare. This is what I'd like you to think through. So when you get to the business analysis workshop, they have got all of that information ready for you to provide when you ask these questions. So business analysis scripts is where I love to get people to. I have a suite that I share as part of our consultancy skills course. But it's absolutely what I'd recommend you have. You need that script of questions, because otherwise it's impossible to remember to ask everything that you need to ask. So it's much better to get a suite of questions together that you can ask on these projects that you can also go through in the workshops as well. Now, once you've gathered all these requirements, we then talk about the term requirements engineering. So the question is, do you understand the diagrams to produce and have a set of templates to document all of the processes, requirements, and technical solutions? Do you feel comfortable with this yet? Is this something you need to learn? If it's something you want to learn, then this is where you want to do a deep dive into business analysis training. The final thing is around systems and tools. So as I mentioned, when we talk about documentation, it's not necessarily just a Word document or a spreadsheet. It can be different tools and systems that you can use. Typically, I talk about 5 different tools and systems that you might have ideally integrated that will capture all this information. It's not always the case. But you want to have tools and systems that you can share between you and the rest of the team working on this project, so everybody has one source of truth documentation and that it's been captured all together. So we also look at that, and that's something that you'd want to feel comfortable with and know how to operate. Now, as I mentioned, there is a quiz. There's a whole module on the quiz and a downloadable resource. So there's a couple of questions that we look at about your confidence around business analysis. So as you can see here, the scoring, the purple is no confidence and the dark green is very confident. And then you've got the middle ground in between. So the question that we've got in the quiz about business analysis is, how confident do you feel getting clients ready for technology projects and how to manage them if they aren't quite doing the preparation work they need to? So what would you do in this situation? Do you feel that you're confident to get them ready? And as I say, what would you do if they're not getting it ready? How would you handle that? So there's a suite of things to think through here. From I'm not sure how to help clients get ready for design workshops and projects, and I do not currently have a strategy on how to do this, which would be no confidence, to the dark green is I know what questions to send them and how to get the information ready. I'm comfortable coaching people who need more support and in my technical ability. So that's the very confident. And then you've got the bit in between. So have a think through those questions in your own time. Let's say there is a quiz you can download. The next question is, how confident do you feel preparing documentation for your project? Do you have a consistent approach to process mapping, documenting requirements and deliverables, preparing user testing and training material? So at the no confidence level, you might be at a stage where I do not know how to prepare documentation in a professional way. I do not prepare any. I've made up my own approach and I do not know if this is correct or not. So is that your current status? To being very confident, which is I feel very confident in my ability to prepare documentation that is consistent and up to my professional standards for clients. So that's the scale of anywhere in between as well. Have a think about where you are now. But equally, going back to this point, is this something you want to skill up in? Brilliant. We've got you at Supermums. If you do, we can obviously train you up in more detail. But these are things to be aware of. So thank you for listening to this module. I hope you enjoyed the content and it's made you think through where you currently are on your journey of understanding business analysis. I say we'd love to help you more with business analysis if it's something you want to learn. We have some training around it. So I will move on to the next introduction module. See you soon.